Good evening, and welcome to night 4 of The Conversation, a webinar to provide Catholic perspective on end-of-life issues. We're delighted to have you join us this evening. My name is Elizabeth Murray, Senior Development Officer with the Catholic Foundation, and we are happy to host this program tonight. In honor of one of this evening's presenters, Chris Taylor, let us begin our time together with a prayer to St. Christopher. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. O glorious St. Christopher, you have inherited a beautiful name, Christ bearer, as a result of the wonderful legend that while carrying people across a raging stream, you also carried the child Jesus. Teach us to be true Christ bearers to those who do not know him. Protect all of us that travel both near and far, and always petition Jesus to be with us always. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. We have a great deal of good information to cover this evening, so we're going to forego our usual housekeeping items and introduce our first speaker, Chris Taylor. Chris is the funeral director with Dignity Memorial Sparkman Group. He spent his entire 43-year career as a funeral director, having learned his craft as an apprentice under Jerry Crane. A lifelong Catholic, most of his funeral services are in our faith community, and as a result, he helps to mentor other funeral directors on conducting Catholic services to numerous dignitaries. Chris and his wife, Kelly, attend St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Church and are members of the Sarah Club. Chris, take it away.
Thanks very much. There's many things to cover in the program tonight. The list that I have is the top 9. It's not 10, it's 9 things, but you can make it as long as you want it. But I've isolated it down to 9 things. And so let us begin by exploring number 1. First thing that I would point out is you should know something about funeral planning, and that's why the 9 things. So everybody needs to be informed about the options available. When I say be informed, the fact that you're on this call or Zoom meeting at all means that you're wanting to be informed. And at the end of the show, at the end of the presentation, my cell phone number is going to appear. And if you don't ask any questions this evening and you want to ask me something privately or you think of something tonight or tomorrow and you want to call me and ask me, you're welcome to do that. And the number will be there. And so the fact that you're informed is a good thing. You want to write your wishes down. When I say write them down, I have one son. My wife and I have one son, Drew, and we've told him specifically and written down exactly what we want. It's not because I'm a funeral director. It's basically because I'm 65. And so what I want you to do is write it down, but don't put it in a lockbox, because I have made arrangements with people that don't know specific, and they say, oh, we've got to wait until the lockbox, and maybe they're going to go to the bank or whatever. But don't just put it in a lockbox. Share it with somebody. Share it with your wife, share it with your kids, or share it with someone that you know and trust, because that piece will come out. I say talk about it with your family. So what you're writing down, I encourage you, and I've asked permission to use somebody's name that talked to me about specifics, and we had a good conversation. And so Joe Barth and I sat and visited after the meeting, and then he contacted me well after the meeting. We talked and even showed him specifics. So he has a couple of kids, but he is beginning the process of writing everything down, and I have his permission to talk about that. And so, you know, we looked at different cemeteries that he might consider, and we were somewhat specific about some things. This is a rather long process to talk about and decide on final disposition. What do I mean, and what is a final disposition? that there is a 100% chance that all of us are going to pass away and die. So you could go to a cemetery, but cremation is a possibility, but it is a not finality, because something has to be done with that urn. The bishops and the priest encourage us as Catholics, and it's great to talk to all of y'all as Catholic people. The bishops and priests encourage us, if we're going to be cremated, that we're interred in a cemetery, not necessarily just a Catholic cemetery. It could be a secular cemetery, but the priest is going to be there, and we're not instructed, or we're discouraged from dividing the cremated remains up and sending a little bit to where our favorite vacation spot, or a little bit's going to go in this cemetery and a little bit's going to go over there. So they want us to stay all together. The third item that you see there is organ donation. If someone wants to donate, they need to do some paperwork in advance while they're still very much alive and they're still thinking about it, because you don't want to wait when you're on death's doorstep to begin the organ donation process. And I know that intimately, because my brother, God rest his soul, died, and he was wanting to donate, but he didn't do anything in advance. So we had to do some things for him. And I know very well that there's a lot to be done. And so I encourage you to investigate that and find out a little bit more about that organ donation piece, because there's some paperwork to be done. Don't be afraid to ask about prices. And the prices would be not only the funeral home, but the cemetery that's going to be involved, if a cemetery is to be involved, and it perhaps is going to be. So people ask me sometimes, they say, you're a funeral director, what's the price to if we want to have a full traditional funeral and then be buried? That's a very broad question. So I would simply say to you, how much is a car, vehicle, or how much do you spend on a suit when you go out? It's all across the board, but the average cost of a funeral today, in today's dollars, the average cost is easily about $15,000, would not be unusual. The cost of cremation can be a little bit less than that, because what you're talking about in cremation, it's got a lot of moving parts to it, just like anything else. Sometimes we have a traditional funeral and we go to the church to, let's say we go to St. Rita's and we have a casket, but then instead of turning left and going to the cemetery, we turn right and go back to the funeral home, because we're going to cremate, and the family goes to have a reception at St. Rita, and we can facilitate that. But again, that gets back to item number 2, and write it down and investigate exactly what is going to happen with your body, with what you want and your desires. And don't be afraid to ask for prices, whether it's the cemetery. And it said at the beginning that I'm with Dignity Memorial. We do everything from managing the diocesan cemeteries to having a process where we go to Hillcrest, for instance. It's no secret that Hillcrest is on Northwest Highway, just down the street from Highland Park, University Park, and Preston Hollow. The price of that property is going to be a little bit more than some other cemeteries, a Calvary Hill, or let's say a Grove Hill Cemetery, which we also manage. So the price of a cemetery and the price of burial depends on what the family wants to spend and what they decide on. Now, sometimes some families have property already in the family lot because mom and dad are buried over in that cemetery and they're going to be buried there. So again, you need to investigate exactly that. Here's a big thing: consider planning or prepaying for arrangements. We've talked about the first 5 and the possibilities involved in that. And so you have to think about, do you want to prepay And do you want to plan accordingly and sitting down with someone to get the specifics and get down to that granular spot? Again, we're talking with Catholics, so I can tell you that there are certain prayer cards that are, people have favorite prayer cards, favorite saints, and we want to know that, because the thing that hurts my feelings the most is sitting around a family, sitting around with a family at an arrangement time and say, well, I think Dad would like this particular saint, but he never voiced it. But if he writes it down, you got you've got that down, and it's a piece that you would want. The seventh thing is to know about prearranged services and Medicaid. So again, if you're 65 or thereabouts, you're going to know about Medicaid, but there's some prearrangement possibilities that could be involved with that. And you need to know that specifically, and you can get that sometimes from a wealth planner or someone at the bank or an attorney friend of yours or a funeral director. So you need to know specifically what benefits apply to you. I've given an example of a national cemetery. If you're a veteran, there's a national cemetery here in Dallas. And I was just at that cemetery, as a matter of fact, today. And so there are things that apply to you. Some companies have burial plans that are much more in tune to having available. And for instance, if you work for the diocese or for a diocesan school, there's something through our company that might be applicable, but you need to know the specifics about that. The ninth thing is you want to speak to your parish or your parish priest before you speak to the funeral home. And the reason that we have that on there is that it's difficult for us sometimes, like if a family shows up on a Friday or Saturday, for us to contact some of the funeral directors in our company will text me and say, hey, we know you're off right now, but do you have so-and-so's name? I've got a bunch of names and phone numbers in my phone. And so family wants to set a time for a funeral the next week. And so I find out the answers to that and let them know what the possibilities are involved. So you want to talk to the parish and find out specifically what readings, what you want to do in the way of having the funeral and the possibilities involved. And the priest will make you aware of that and the possibilities involved at the church, because sometimes the family wants to go immediately to the cemetery and sometimes they want to have a reception. Again, the possibilities of talking with a priest is good to know that first before you come to the funeral home. I'm just getting a note from Michael, and he's saying that, all right, so Elizabeth, you have some questions and things that you want me to answer?
I do, Chris. One of our participants is asking regarding donor organ donation. They have it indicated on their license. Is that sufficient, or is there other things that particular person should do, or anybody should do, if the only thing they have written down is that on their driver's license they are an organ donor?
The organ donor on your license is a start. I would say that's a very good beginning to the process, but there is a step further. The outfit that we're involved with that I know is UT Southwestern. We are in Dallas, Texas, and UT Southwestern, everybody knows that it's a outstanding facility, but they have the donation possibilities involved. But again, contacting them and finding out the answers is a good thing for you, because it's going to cause you to ask some questions and get some answers that are really, really good for them, for you and for them to give. And then you can tell us, because the thing that I know for sure is that you're going to want to um, have some kind of a funeral mass, and it perhaps is going to happen before again, the UT Southwestern, eventually when their conclusion of, if they take the entire body, the folks, then they cremate, and then what is done with that urn is a piece that you need to examine a little bit. So that's the answer to that, is don't just leave it to your driver's license. Also call UT Southwestern and get some answers.
Okay, that's a good idea. Can you also explain the difference between a funeral mass and a memorial service?
Yeah, the funeral mass is something that every priest will do when a cremated remains or a casket is present. A memorial mass is done in memory of, and the liturgy, while it's somewhat the same, it's a little bit different in that we as Catholics have the uh, absolute that we're going to have a funeral mass if the urn is present or if the casket is present, and it's going to be a memorial mass, which is very much like a daily mass, if you will. Um, Everyone's been to mass, and so that's the difference in the two, is whether the body or the urn is present.
Okay. Another participant is asking if you could give a little bit more information about cremation and a funeral in the Catholic Church.
So there are different options that the Diocese of Dallas has, where cremation's involved. Right now, there are 5 columbariums in the diocese. I know Prince of Peace has one, St. Joseph and Richardson has one, St. Elizabeth Seton in Plano, St. Jude's in Allen, and Mary Immaculate over in the Carrollton Farmers Branch area. So you have 2 options there. Again, you can have a full casket there, and instead of going to the cemetery and having burial, then that person can be cremated, and then you would gather again, perhaps a week later, because some people are under the misnomer that a cremation happens right then and there. The next day you could have the urn present. That's not the case, especially in Dallas, Texas, because there's a lot of paperwork that has to happen. So we don't, the church may plan for the urn side service to be the next week, and we manipulate things and have that happen, but we have to schedule accordingly. But in as much as we work with the church to find out when we can go there with the casket, the same thing happens with the urn, whether we're having a graveside with the urn present at the church for the funeral mass.
Okay. So as a follow-on to that, approximately how long does it take to get a body cremated?
That's a good question. In today's world, and it has nothing to do with this COVID thing, but kind of everything to do with it. When we cremate, it's not unusual for, let's say somebody dies on a Monday or Tuesday, for the next week, Wednesday or Thursday, because the amount of paperwork that we have to do as funeral professionals. First of all, the death certificate has to be signed by the doctor. Then it has to be certified by the medical examiner and Dallas County Medical Examiner, and has to go to Austin. And so it's not unusual for it to be a full week or 10 days. And while funeral directors work on weekends, a lot of the people that I've mentioned don't work on Saturday and Sunday. And so even though it's a full week, it's, in their minds, it's business days. So it's not unusual for a cremation to be easily a week to 10 days out before it happens. And that's, people say to me that, oh, I don't want embalming. So we have a refrigeration facility where we place people in and take care of making sure that the family's aware of that.
Okay. There's another question regarding the National Cemetery, which you mentioned earlier. Is there a pre-approval to be buried in the National Cemetery while you are still living?
The every veteran has a number that, for lack of better purposes, what I would call a serial number, and it's on file with the what I call the big house, which is in St. Louis. So we would call St. Louis, but you're welcome that there is nothing that can be done in advance where the property is concerned, but they can find out if they're eligible for the cemetery property, because there's two things that occur. Not only are you able to be buried there, but your spouse is able to be buried at the National Cemetery. And they also have the ability to have the cremated remains. They have columbariums at all the cemeteries. Takes care of the opening, closing, the cemetery property, and the marker is all covered by the National Cemetery. So that clearly takes care of sometimes, like, if you're comparing apples to apples, if you were to purchase that same property and everything I've talked about, it's easily $8, $10, $12,000 that some people are looking for savings. And that people sometimes aren't there because of the savings. They're there because they're going to be buried in a patriotic cemetery kind of a thing. A word to the wise. Sometimes I have some families that say to me, he always wanted to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. I can tell you that I have, through the years, buried people in Arlington National Cemetery, but the waiting time for a family to go there and for us to have the burial is right at 4 weeks, call it a month. And it's not unusual for it to be 6 weeks. And so the funeral home there obviously doesn't want to take care and take the casket. And so we hold the person in Dallas and then we send them up there. But the Arlington National is where a lot of the gurus are. In fact, it's where the current Supreme Court justice is going to be buried next to her husband.
Okay.
Which, by the way, I'll tell you that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, while she's lying in state at the Capitol or the Supreme Court, and she's going to have the funeral, she's to be cremated. And a lot of people in the funeral industry know that she's going to be cremated and she's going to be placed with her husband in Arlington National Cemetery, but it's the way that she wanted it done. But again, she told the people, and that's exactly what's going to happen, is she's going to have a traditional funeral, but then she's to be cremated, and then the urn is going to be placed with her husband, who's in the full casket. It's not unusual for us to do that.
Another question that just came in: if you have the body at a funeral mass and then have a cremation, is the body embalmed before the mass?
Doesn't have to be. Sometimes some people do, but does not necessarily have to be embalmed. Sometimes people specifically don't want to be embalmed, and so we place them in a refrigeration cooler, and then we bring them out and place them in the casket, and then we go to the cemetery or to the mass, and then back to the cooler, or then on to cremation.
Okay. Clarification on your list of items. Item number 7, you mentioned Medicaid and age 65. Did you mean Medicaid or did you mean Medicare, or are they interchangeable?
If I said Medicaid, it could have been Medicare, but the bottom line is make yourself familiar with that. And as much as you're going to make yourself familiar with the prearrangement perhaps, and you're going to write down the message that I would get out to you, whether you purchase something in advance or not, write it down and don't just stick it away. Make sure that those that care for you and know you best know that your wishes are written down, because that's the key thing, is whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, or you're going to get to that point where you want to have it written down, you want to share that with someone who knows you, cares about you, and taking care of you at the end.
Okay. And one final question. Does your company arrange for the obituary with the newspaper, or is that something the family has to do on their own?
Both. It's a good question. I take care of submitting it to there's two versions of the obituary today. Used to be only one version, but now there's an online version, and the online version, you can have as many words and donations that you would want. So let's say that an average obituary is a couple, 3 or 4 inches long. If you wanted to have much longer and more words online, as opposed to in the paper, the paper version, you want to have the for sure things like where the mass is going to be, where the rosary is going to be, and who the survivors are, and specifically perhaps where the donations are to be made or the honorariums to be made. The online version, you may want to talk a little bit more about the specific things like whether you were involved in something, a hobby, or what your work was, etc. So you can do that on the online version as opposed to the written version, because the written version, why I'm saying that is the written version at the Dallas Morning News it's a per line charge. So it's not unusual for an obituary to be $700, $800, $900, $1,000. And you see those photos in the paper, that in itself is numerous lines just to put the photo in there. But online you can have more than one photo. You might have a photo of you and your grandkids, or you and your wife, or whatever.
So you might sit down with the family and sort of help them craft both?
Yeah, typically the family puts it together, and someone that's a key thing is someone in the family designated. For instance, in my family, it would be my sister, because she's a wordsmith, so she knows the English language and she can design and put together. And then you don't want just someone that doesn't know them, like a funeral director. You want to make sure, and then we'll help you with the possibilities.
Right. Okay. Well, Chris, thank you very much for your time this evening. We truly appreciate everything you've shared with us and the expertise you've shared with us. And we can't thank you enough for giving us your time this evening.
Happy to do that, Elizabeth.
Great. So our second speaker this evening is my colleague, Michael George. Michael is a senior development officer with the Catholic Foundation. For more than 20 years, he has been responsible for developing and cultivating donor relationships and assisting with planned gifts to the foundation. Michael serves on the board of the Dallas Estate Planning Council and is a member of the Dallas Council of Charitable Gift Planners, the Estate Planning Council of North Texas, and is the past president of the Dallas chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Michael earned his certificate in fundraising executive designation in 2005. Michael, take it away.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. Really appreciate your help with all this. Good evening. Over the entire conversation, there have been a lot of weighty subjects that we have addressed, but now's the time when we get to relax a little bit and get to have a little bit more fun, because most people find charitable giving to be something that is actually very, very joyful. And it's our honor at the Catholic Foundation to be a part of those moments along with donors. So let's start off by explaining a little bit about who the Catholic Foundation is and what we do. So very simply, our mission, the Catholic Foundation promotes compassionate charitable giving and stewardship that serves donors and the needs of our community. So what does that really mean? Well, in short, we have two parts of the organization that we work with. The one that you're probably the most familiar with is the grants side. And last year, I'm happy to say that the Catholic Foundation made over $34 million of grants, and that is to hundreds of charities nationwide, Catholic, non-Catholic, and one of the things that's really a key feature is you'll go to some of the Catholic schools in town, you'll go to some of the Catholic parishes in town, and you'll see a plaque up there that talks about what the Catholic Foundation did in terms of serving a particular grant. Well, those unrestricted grants are really, it's less than 10% of the money that goes out of the Catholic Foundation. And that leads me to the other part of what we do, because one of the things that the Catholic Foundation does very well is, as we say in our mission statement, is to serve donors. And the way we serve donors is by providing vehicles for donors' charitable giving. People will set up various donor advised funds or endowments, and then they will use those to organize their charitable giving. And last year, the Catholic Foundation received $27 million in gifts from people just like you and me who do their charitable giving through the Catholic Foundation. So that's a little bit of a preamble in terms of the foundation and what we do. So we're just going to cover very topically, we're going to cover some of the things involved in that process. So first of all, what makes people focus on their estate planning and charitable giving? Well, first of all, I can tell you what it's not. And what it's not is, it's not accidental, it's not happenstance. I can tell you that nobody wakes up in the morning and gets out of bed and they stretch, and the first thing they say is, this is going to be a great day to do my will. Nobody does that. So then why do they? The biggest reason why people do is because as they go through their life, there are different milestones that people hit that cause them to think of their own mortality. They cause them to think about their family at a treetop level. So, and you can see most of these things yourself. I mean, think about your own situation. It's graduation from college. Perhaps it's your first grandchild. The death of a parent or an older family member is something that gets a lot of people's attention and causes folks to be more introspective. Obviously, the serious illness of a spouse. And also, as people approach retirement, they think to themselves, okay, I have to get my affairs in order. Also, how am I going to be remembered? So all of that plays into charitable giving. So what is a planned gift? Well, you can read these for yourself. The thing that I want to focus on more than anything else is that typically a planned gift is usually a little bit larger than the average annual gift that you might give to a favorite charity. Also, this is not checkbook philanthropy. This is something where it's usually out of assets, not out of your income. So a very, very important distinction. It involves more paperwork, and usually it involves either one or more professionals to help you make it happen. So those are very, very important distinguishing characteristics of what we call a planned gift. So why do people do it? Why do people make and plan for these charitable gifts? And the first reason, and this is overwhelmingly the biggest reason why people do anything charitably, and it's because they're generously minded. They want to help others. That is why people give to begin with. So it helps fulfill a passion that somebody might have for charitable giving. Also, again, something that's been a constant theme throughout the conversation is the idea of planning and having your say in terms of where your money, where your assets go. And charitable giving is no different. It gives you the opportunity to designate where and how your gifts will be used. So very, very important that your wishes are known in charitable giving as much as any other aspect of estate planning. It also is a way for you to stay connected to causes and organizations that are the most important to you. Most people with their parish, they didn't just make gifts to their parish and then when they die expect that the parish was going to go away. They wanted the parish to last and they wanted it to be there for a long time. So it appeals to a lot of people to support the parish while they're alive and also after they're gone. Some people feel that it's important for their family to have something to point towards in terms of their charitable intent. People will use charitable gifts as a way to teach and encourage their children to be more charitable. So having a family legacy is something that is very important to a lot of people as well. So this may sound obvious, but who do you give your gifts to? Obviously, one of the things that you can do in terms of charitable giving is you can give directly to your favorite organizations. And that is a great way to do it. But especially if you have a number of different charitable organizations, and most people I know, they have more than one charitable intent. So a great way to organize it is the possibility of a private foundation. So the one drawback, or one of the drawbacks with a private foundation, however, is really in order to be effective and efficient, you have to have a pretty good sum of money that you're willing to put into the private foundation to make it worth your while. So for most people, utilizing some type of a charitable fund, whether it's a donor advised fund or whether it's a permanent endowment at a community foundation, makes more sense. And the reason why is because the community foundation, they take on the administration of the gift. Not only that, but it's lower dollar amounts that typically are used to fund different vehicles at a community foundation. So it's great for people who perhaps maybe have smaller estates. It's also great for people who have multiple charities. So I hope that makes sense. So let's talk for a second about what to give. And you can look at your own assets, and there's a pretty broad range of assets here. And this is not by all means comprehensive, but there are two things that I really want to point your attention to because they make terrific charitable gifts after you're gone. Number one is a retirement plan, whether it's an IRA, 401k, 403b. IRA assets have always made a great charitable gift, now so more than ever. And the reason behind that is, okay, back before 2019, you could leave money to your children in an IRA, for example. And when your children start to draw money out of the IRA, it's taxed, unlike the rest of your post-tax assets, which get a step up in basis. So all things being equal, because charities do not pay tax, IRAs make a great charitable gift and a very efficient charitable gift, because if you leave it to the charity, they're not going to pay tax on it. So you get the full value of your dollar going to where you want it to go. The reason why insurance gifts are really, really good is because of the leverage opportunity that it gives to a donor. And what I mean by that is typically you buy an insurance policy, and let's say it's $1 million insurance policy. You buy it at a smaller face amount. So what that allows you to do is the possibility of making a larger gift than you ever intended. So because you're using less money to do it and you're utilizing the leverage that an insurance policy offers. Obviously, there are other examples of other assets, but by and large, I just wanted to point you towards those two critical things. So another issue is when to give and how to give. So, obviously you can give now. Most of us are familiar with writing individual checks or giving stock to charity. We've raised the issue in terms of a donor advised fund. And all a donor advised fund is what happens is a donor puts assets, whether it's stock or a check, into the donor advised fund. You get your tax deduction right then and there. And especially with the rising of the standard deduction on your income taxes, a big strategy is a lot of people will open a donor advised fund, and they will bunch their charitable gifts so that they have a big tax deduction in one year, and then perhaps the next year they will take the standard deduction, and then they go back and forth. And that is a very efficient way of using a donor advised fund. So you can also make gifts later, and the vast majority of planned gifts are gifts that are given later. So you can give gifts through your will, or especially if you have multiple charities like we were talking about earlier, you have the opportunity to establish a permanent endowment. And that works great because what happens is you're not giving up the asset until after you're gone. And then after you're gone, money goes into this permanent endowment and it makes annual gifts to the causes that were important to you, that you've named. So a very, very effective way of giving. So there are a few different types of funds that create a now and later opportunity for donors. And part of them are what I call split interest gifts. And what a split interest gift basically means is donor gets something and charity gets something. Now, with both a charitable gift annuity and a charitable remainder trust, which are listed, what happens is donor puts an asset into, let's say, a charitable remainder trust. They get a partial tax deduction right at that moment. And then during their lifetime, typically, they will get income year after year after year. They will get payments out of the charitable trust. And after they're gone, whatever is remaining goes to charity, hence the term charitable remainder trust. So that's just a quick overview, but there's one that I really want to point you towards in terms of a good now and later gift. And essentially it starts with a donor advised fund. And what we do is we utilize the donor advised fund, but we put a provision in there that allows for the fund to be a permanent endowment after they're gone. So they use it just like a regular donor advised fund. They put gifts into the donor advised fund and they make grants out of it periodically throughout the rest of their lives. Then after they pass away, they usually make a gift from their estate to the permanent endowment. And one of the great things about this plan is the opportunity it gives you in terms of efficiently utilizing your will. Instead of laundry listing your charities in your will, what you can do is list them on an exhibit page in a fund agreement. And simply all you have to do in your will then is say how much you want to give and that you want to give it to this fund at this community foundation. It is a very, very efficient way of making those types of charitable gifts. It makes your current giving more tax-wise and easier. If you change your mind on charitable beneficiaries for the endowment piece of it, you can always change that. You can change the exhibit page in the fund agreement. And what that means more than anything else is unless you change the proportion of what you want to give to charity, you never have to change your will again. And that is a great, great benefit. So this is kind of a trick question that we get occasionally. How much should I give to charity? And there are three typical answers that we see here at the foundation of what people do. We hear about the idea of a biblical tithe, and I think we all understand what that is, and that is 10% of your estate going to charity. So that really ties in with moral theology and is something that people pay attention to. The second one is a little bit more esoteric. It's something where if you set up a permanent endowment, for example, how much you want to put in there depends on how much you want to go to charities. And what some people will do is they will take whatever annual gifts they have and they will whatever annual gifts they have, what they want to do is after they're gone, they want that amount of money to be going to these closely held charities. So the way a rule of thumb in terms of building an endowment that will spit off a particular amount, let's say you have $10,000 that you give on an annual basis. Well, if you multiply that by 20, so 20 times $10,000 is, not everybody all at once here, $200,000, right? So if you have a $200,000 endowment, in general, that will, at a 5% spending policy, kick off $10,000 a year to the favorite charities that you have. So, and the last one that we have heard of, and we've heard a lot more about this recently within the past several years, is the idea of treating charity as another child. Let's say that you have 3 children and most people are very, very equitably minded. They want to treat their children the same. So they had divided their estate by 3. So if you treat charity as a 4th child, instead of dividing by 3 and each kid getting 33%, you divide it by 4. And your children each get 25% and a share for charity. at 25% as well. That is something that has resonated quite a bit with our donors and has been something that's helped them quite a good deal. So we've talked a lot about theory and the who's, where's, what's, and why's. But what I want to leave you with more than anything else is a great example of a charitably minded lady who utilized the Catholic Foundation, in this case, for her charitable giving. Louise Buhrer was a 5th-generation Swiss immigrant, and she was Ursuline class of 1935. She was really involved in her community. She didn't just give of her treasure, she also gave of her time and talent. She was a civic volunteer, Catholic causes primarily, and a parishioner at St. Bernard's, but she had no children. So what she did in the early 90s was she established, remember when we were talking about split interest gifts? She established a charitable remainder trust with about $770,000 in stock and property. Well, 8 years later, Louise passed away, but each year she received a check from the Catholic Foundation that were her annual proceeds from this charitable trust. So in 8 years, she received over $360,000 from her charitable trust. But her legacy lives on because at death, her charitable trust established a permanent endowment. And now the assets at the time of her death were $4.5 million. And not only that, but since her death, over the last 15 years or so, over $2.5 million has gone out to the charities that she wanted to have supported. And the fund has grown to over $9.5 million. So it's a great example of a win-win situation. The donor received income during their lifetime. They were able to give to the charities that they wanted, and she has a lasting legacy with a wonderful community foundation. So that's the type of impact your philanthropy can have. So I just wanted to leave you with that example. So in wrapping up, let's talk about next steps, because we've talked a lot about planning. But let's back up for a second. It's really, really important to pray about what's right for you, what's right for your family, whether it's charitable giving, whether it's legal considerations, whether it's bioethics, whether it's funeral planning, what have you. It's important to pray about what you need to do and what your wishes are. At that point, take a look at all of your gifts, all of your assets, because all of what you have accumulated over the years truly are a gift from God. And then take that last step. Don't put it off. Plan in terms of how you are going to share all of God's gifts with your family and also the causes that are important to you. So in the last piece is something that I came across, and it's something that I really like. And it's a quote from St. Augustine. It says, "Pray as if everything depended upon God, but work as if everything depended upon you." You can have the best of intentions, but until you put it into play, somebody else is going to be making decisions for you, whether it's charitable legacy or anything else having to do with your estate. So I hope that that was helpful for you. And at this point, what I'd like to do is ask Elizabeth. Elizabeth, do you have any questions for me?
I do, Michael. We have a couple of questions for you regarding a few of the things that you brought up. The first one is regarding the IRA. Is there a tax advantage for the IRA gift to charity? Does it apply to both a traditional IRA and the Roth, or does that only apply to the traditional IRA?
That's a great question. Thank you. Really where the leverage is in terms of the taxation is with the traditional IRA. A Roth, you have already paid tax on it. So when it is distributed out, it goes without tax to your kids. Mm-hmm. So, the strategy that I talked about in terms of utilizing your IRA, it works best with a traditional IRA. And one of the things that donors need to remember is that now, because of the Secure Act, instead of being able to stretch an IRA out over your lifetime, you're limited to 10 years in most circumstances. I believe that Mike Lynch talked about that. So it's really important to note that you have that limitation, which makes an IRA gift all the more attractive as a charitable gift.
Okay. Another question regards a donor advised fund, and what is the smallest amount per year that the Catholic Foundation would manage one of those funds?
Thanks for that question. The smallest amount to open a donor advised fund with the Catholic Foundation is $10,000. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to keep a $10,000 balance. As a matter of fact, what a lot of people will do is, remember the strategy that I talked about in terms of bunching? What people will do is they will load up their donor advised fund and they will completely spend it out. And then they'll load it up again and spend it out. So a lot of donor advised funds can go down to zero and then you load them back up. But to start with, we like to see at least $10,000.
Okay. Earlier in the presentation, you spoke about insurance gifts. What are you seeing in regard to insurance gifts? Are donors giving the prepaid policy, or are donors giving a policy and donating the premiums on an annual basis, where in the end, the Catholic Foundation becomes the owner of the policy, but the donor donates the premiums?
The answer is yes. You see both. And if somebody's trying to minimize their lump sum outlay, what we will see is them gifting a whole life policy, and that's the one that carries a tax deduction with it. They will gift a whole life policy and they're still paying premiums on it. If they make the Catholic Foundation, for example, the owner and beneficiary of the policy, then what they can do is they can make an annual gift to the Catholic Foundation to keep that policy in force. That annual gift is tax deductible, and it is up to the Catholic Foundation to keep the policy in force. Obviously, if somebody has a completely paid up policy, we probably see more of those after somebody has passed away, but we do see a few of them, and they make great charitable gifts because there's no current outlay of cash, and you get a nice tax deduction for the policy.
The other thing that is sort of related to insurance gifts more into to the annuity side is, the difference between a commercial annuity and a charitable gift annuity, and what are the benefits between the two of them?
Well, typically the payment rate on a commercial annuity is going to be a little bit higher. This can get pretty esoteric in terms of the particulars. The bottom line is, one of the big advantages of a charitable gift annuity is the fact that the annuitant is guaranteed a set amount of money every year, for the rest of their lives. So that's a really, really important distinction. The reason why I say that a commercial annuity probably has a higher percentage payout to begin with is, on a charitable gift annuity, part of what you're getting is tax-free return of principal. So the effective yield on a charitable gift annuity is relatively comparable, if you will, to a commercial annuity, but it varies situation by situation. That's something we're very experienced at the Catholic Foundation, and if there are specific questions, we would be happy to walk down that path with you and figure out what's best.
Great. Another question came in regarding charitable giving trends. Are you seeing anything different given the COVID-19 situation we're in versus pre-COVID-19?
We have really been very fortunate here at the Catholic Foundation. It's something where I think Americans traditionally have come to other people's aid in times of trouble. And it has been no different with COVID. There are a lot of companies, a lot of charities that are struggling in these times. And just, if you will, over the first 6 months of the year, I believe the number in terms of gifts to the Catholic Foundation was $8 million. So that's a pretty big number. And a portion of that is going for COVID relief. But whether it's direct COVID relief or to support charities that are having a hard time getting donations right now, we do see people stepping forward and doing that. The big changes in terms of how people give are really related to the law, more than anything else. For example, I mentioned the Secure Act and its effect on IRAs. So when changes are made in tax policy, people change the way they charitably give. They're not any less generous. As a matter of fact, sometimes, they are able to give more, but the way they do it and the way they structure their gifts change.
Okay. And one final question this evening. Chris in his presentation discussed the importance of talking about arranging your funerals and your wants and your wishes and talking about that with your family. What is your thoughts about talking about your charitable intentions with your family, and how do you get your family involved in this?
I think it's really an important piece, perhaps, of modeling philanthropy for your children. I think it's a great way to show children the need to be generous with your time, your talent, and your treasure. So involving the family is a great way of doing it. We have a number of families who have established donor-advised funds, and they involve the children in the decision-making process. Obviously, the parents make that decision and they give the decision to the foundation so that the grant can go out, but they will involve their children, ask their children's opinion, have their children go out and research, what's the best use of our money. So they prepare them to handle the mantle of philanthropy as they go along in life. And what a lot of families will do is, if they set up a permanent endowment, they will make their children successor advisors, where once they are gone, they'll put a gift or something from their estate into a permanent endowment. And while the children are alive, they're the ones who are making the decision in terms of where those charitable gifts go. So I hope that answers your question, Elizabeth.
I think that will answer everybody's question. That is our last question of the evening, Michael.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the questions, everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth, for posing them to me. And just a reminder, if you have other questions, whether they be specific or general in nature, please pass them along to us. This is where you can find contact information, whether it's email address or our phone number. And anybody on this list, whether you need help, direction in terms of legal, whether you need direction in terms of pastoral, whether it's funeral planning and more technically related, or whether it has to do with your charitable giving, just know that we're happy, all of us, to answer any questions that you might have. So please don't be shy about reaching out. So, over the last 10 days, the people who have been in the conversation for the entire time, we've spent 4 hours together over the last 10 days. And that might not seem like a lot of time, but it is our hope that it has, at least in part, changed the way you think about death and dying. Hopefully it's given you a little bit more confidence in terms of approaching the subject with your family. Hopefully it has encouraged you to solidify your plans. And here's the biggie. Hopefully it's given you some peace of mind. Number one, knowing that your wishes are going to be fulfilled. And number two, knowing the tenets of our Catholic faith and that there is peace. So, because that's what we want for you more than anything else is peace. So after all this is over, we will have an evaluation that'll come out. You can help us improve the program by filling out the evaluation. In addition, we will have an email that comes out that gives you links to all 4 videos. We recorded them all, and we will have those for you within a few days. There will also be a page that will come out to you via email, and we have materials, whether they be forms or just informational materials, that you will be able to order, and we will send them out to you, mostly electronically, but we will send them to you. So look for those in the next few days. But, we couldn't get through this without a big thank you to our presenters. All 5 of our presenters did, I think, a terrific job, and most grateful for Chris Taylor with what he shared with us tonight, his time and his expertise. I also have to thank the staff of the Catholic Foundation, who has been just wonderful throughout all this. Cheryl Mansour, our Vice President of Development, Elizabeth Murray, Senior Development Officer, Bill Kula, who's our Director of Marketing and Communications, the latest member of our foundation team, Amy DeLise, our Administrative Assistant, Thank you all for what you have meant and how you have pulled this together. It's been absolutely wonderful to be a part of. And finally, we couldn't do this without you. So thank you for your generosity of time. Thank you for the thought that you have given this entire conversation. We really appreciate your attending, and we hope that you put this information to good use. So with that, thanks again from the conversation. Good night.